Hello and welcome to our second day of the NIC.br Annual Workshop on Survey Methodology on Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Data Production. This series of webinars is jointly organized by the Brazilian Network Information Center, NIC.br, which I represent today, and the National School of Statistical Science linked to the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, the IBGE. So a big thank you to our partners. I am Tatiana Gereissati, Coordinator of Sectoral Studies and Qualitative Methods at NIC.br's Regional Center for Studies on the Development of the Information Society, and I am pleased to be the moderator of this webinar today. This special online edition is marking the 10-year anniversary of this workshop, and we're very happy to announce that more than 584 participants have registered for this year's event. So a few brief announcements before we begin. All webinars are being recorded and will be made available through our event website. You are most welcome to ask questions to speakers through the question and answer box. The webinar is being delivered in English and simultaneous translation is being offered into Portuguese. And finally, please check your emails for guidelines on the webinar certificate. So yesterday, we opened this webinar series with an important discussion on how to promote a more human rights-centered and ethical approach to artificial intelligence. In face of the rapid advancements of artificial intelligence, much has been debated on its potential contributions for innovation, productivity, and economic growth in general. But have these promises been met? What are the actual effects of artificial intelligence on the economy and society as a whole? To address these questions, policymakers need data. They need precise, robust, and timely data that will guide them in the development and implementation of AI policies. So today, we will showcase different AI measurement efforts by inviting speakers to share their experiences in producing official AI statistics on this very complex field of research. So we will begin with a keynote presentation and then invite 3 different speakers on the topic. All speakers will have a chance to address questions from the floor. So to open today's webinar, I'm pleased to invite our keynote speaker, Mr. Luis Aranda, who is an artificial intelligence policy analyst at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. The OECD has been an important organization in promoting this discussion on the need of evidence-based policymaking. So Luis, thank you very much indeed for your presence. You have the floor for 45 minutes.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Tatiana, for the introduction. I would like to start by thanking the organizers for the wonderful opportunity to join this important and much needed event on reflections on AI and the future of data production. I am very pleased in particular to be here with you to share some of our efforts to help implement the OECD AI Principles as part of today's webinar on public statistics on AI. Now, I've been invited to speak in front of a screen for 45 minutes straight, which in other times would have been considered, I think, a cause of medical concern. So I beg you to please bear with me and stay engaged as I try to make this seem as short as possible for you so that we can all enjoy some time for good old discussion after the presentation. Now, the OECD has taken a leading role in the development of a global policy framework for AI. As some of you may know, OECD countries, the G20 and other nations have endorsed the OECD AI Principles. Having said that, I would like to share with you the plan for today, which is divided into 3 sections. Number 1, I would like to tell you a bit more about the OECD AI Principles. Secondly, and this is where I think I'll try to spend most of my time today, I'd like to tell you about the efforts we're undertaking to bring these principles to practice, in particular through the AI Policy Observatory and the OECD Network of Experts on AI. And last, I'd like to tell you something about COVID-19 resources that we've made available on OECD.ai. And I know you'll spend most of Thursday and Friday discussing COVID-19 related matters. So I won't dwell much on this today. but I'll just try to serve it as an appetizer for what is to come later this week. Let me just start with some history now. The OECD started working on AI back in 2016 after a G7 ministerial meeting in Japan, when we organized an AI Foresight Forum. Early on, I think the OECD realized that the key challenge would be to design policies that maximize AI's benefits while minimizing the risks in a way that can keep up, of course, with the rapid developments in AI. So in 2018, we had a key development. Our member countries gave the OECD the mission to create some principles that would foster trust in AI. So the members met and they specified 5 criteria that the principles had to meet in order to basically be successful. And you can see them on the screen. The criteria require basically that the principles facilitate innovation and trust, were specific to AI, implementable, foster cooperation, and of course were capable of standing the test of time. Remember, AI is a moving target, so the principle had to be flexible enough to account for this. Now you'd agree with me that when you read this list, it could actually feel like mission impossible, right? And I think for most of us mortals, it would actually be mission impossible. So that's why the OECD decided to call in the experts. And this is where the AI expert group on AI came to help, which we call IGO in short. The group gathered more than 50 experts from all walks of life, including, of course, governments, international organizations, business, the technical community, and labor unions, and so on. Now, the IGO met 4 times in 5 months, which, of course, back when people could still meet and have coffee together. So they met quite a few times in a short period of time. The work of this group eventually became the main input for the OECD AI principles. The principles were adopted in May 2019 by all OECD members and 6 partner countries. And a month later, in June 2019, they were also adopted by the G20. As you know, of course, there is no OECD police, which means that the principles are non-binding for countries. However, they do come with some strong political commitment, and some kind of monitoring from the part of the OECD is expected. Voila, so these are the 10 OECD AI principles to promote trustworthy AI. As you can see, the first 5 are really values-based principles, include things like transparency, explainability, security and safety, etc. Whereas the latter 5 are really policy recommendations for national governments. And we'll go into a little bit more detail later, but I think they're actually a pretty good read if you ever have the time to read the recommendation. But since I know that everyone's busy here, I thought I'll provide a short and digestible version of them today. So here it is, just for you, the OECD AI principles in short. Here we have principle 1, which basically says that AI should benefit everyone, the people and the planet, by driving inclusive growth, sustainable development, and well-being. Principle 2 says that AI systems should be designed in a way that respects the rule of law, human rights, and democratic values, and of course include appropriate safeguards to ensure a fair and just society. Now they're very high level, so we'll see later how we're trying to monitor and implement them. Principle 3 is all about transparency and explainability so that people can understand or challenge AI-based outcomes. Principle 4 says that AI systems must function in a robust, secure, and safe way throughout their life cycle. And Principle 5 says that AI actors should be accountable for the proper functioning of AI systems. Now, the 5 recommendations for national governments, basically principles 6 to 10, include things like investing in AI R&D, fostering a digital ecosystem and an enabling policy environment for AI, building human capacity, which basically means upskilling, reskilling, and ensuring a just transition for workers, as well as fostering an international cooperation. Now, why should you care about the AI principles at all? Well, I think this article by Jessica Cousins in The Hill did a very good job at articulating the reasons, recognizing actually that the principles were the world's first intergovernmental policy guidelines for AI, and that they represent a global reference point for AI governance. So again, this is a good read if you're interested, and I definitely recommend it. I wanted to show you this map only to illustrate the broad international commitment to the AI principles so far. Basically, all you see shaded in blue are countries that have committed to the AI principles. So there you have the OECD members, some other adherents, and the G20. This map is also very good because it shows you the need to reach out to regions like Africa, which is, of course, in gray right now. All right, so that's it for the AI principles. Now I would like to ask you a question. How do we go from principles to practice? And I love this cartoon because I think it really conveys the challenges we all face when trying to monitor new technologies. The cartoon mentions the cloud, of course, but I think this is true for any new technology, like, for instance, AI. We all know that monitoring is hard, but we have to start somewhere. And I think that this is why this webinar, for instance, is so relevant. And I believe that it comes at the right time. So to bring the AI principles to practice, we're undertaking 2 new initiatives, which of course aim to be informative rather than normative. First, and as you see on the left side of your screen, we launched the OECD AI Policy Observatory, or Oecd.ai in short, early in February this year, which is actually an online platform for evidence-based policy analysis on AI. And second, the second initiative, we created a multi-stakeholder network of experts on AI. You see it on the right side of your screen. We call this One AI in short. And they held its first and last physical meeting in February 2020. But don't worry, they're still working, and they keep meeting at least virtually for now. So let me just go into a little bit more detail for each of these initiatives, starting with OECD.ai. OECD.ai is an online platform made up of 4 pillars. And of course, I'll encourage you all to visit it whenever you get a chance. The first pillar, the red one, contains information about the AI principles and some guidance for their implementation. The second pillar provides information on AI public policy topics and policy analysis in areas that go from health to transportation or agriculture, to name a few. The third pillar provides the latest AI trends and data to anchor policies in evidence. And the fourth pillar contains a repository of existing country policies, as well as stakeholder initiatives. So very briefly, and just to give you some idea of what this platform looks like, the first pillar contains an overview page with the OECD AI principles. Once you click on one of those principles, you're going to see a dashboard which contains the actual text of the principle, live news and publications related to the principle, as well as a sample policy initiatives provided by countries that relate to implementing that principle. Now, these initiatives are collected twice a year from governments. Pillar 2 is very similar in structure to Pillar 1. Here, users can navigate content by public policy area. So now again, once you click on a public policy area, for instance, employment in this case, you can see an interactive dashboard with relevant resources, publications from OECD and other sources, as well as country initiatives and live AI news. Now on to Pillar 3. And pillar 3 is all about data. I think this is actually my favorite section. Pillar 3 aims to illustrate AI developments in a timely basis from as many high-quality vantage points as possible. Here we use data from partner organizations. For instance, the news that you see on screen come from Event Registry, a Slovenian startup. To create the visualizations throughout this section, we have as our partner, we have the Joseph Stefan Institute in Slovenia. They have done a tremendous job here. So here what you see on screen, the data point is AI-related news, which is useful to basically see real-time AI developments by country. And if I may just mention here, this is one of the key learnings of our implementation efforts so far. We're all well familiar with websites and observatories that are created in a hurry, get a lot of traction in the first couple of months, and then are forgotten and basically die. So most of the time this happens because keeping them up to date is very resource intensive, and therefore they get quickly outdated. This is actually why we're trying to automate as many areas of OECD.ai as possible, providing live data, of course, to the degree possible. Now, coming back to the news, we also run a sentiment analysis, as you can see on the screen. Even though it's not 100% accurate, it does try to determine whether an article is positive, neutral, or negative from its title and abstract. The news are picked up in all languages, but we provide an option to see news in English only. The second data point is AI research, which we get from Microsoft Academic Graph. And before I keep going, I just want to call your attention to the rise of China here in the map. Basically, Microsoft uses Bing, the search engine, to crawl tens of millions of publications and citations every week. These publications are indexed using NLP techniques, and the database is updated about every 2 weeks. So just to illustrate the dimension here, there are over 1 million new publications, new papers added to the database every month. And the goal of these visualizations is to help policymakers understand the impact of AI research and development investments, which is, of course, as we saw, one of the principles. We have tried to make the visualizations as interactive as possible by providing different filters to let the user play with the data and decide on the parameters he or she wishes to use. One of those filters, as you can see on the screen, is a measure of paper quality provided by Microsoft Academic Graph. The figure you see on screen is for the top 50% of AI publications. As you notice, the US starts to stand out from the rest of the countries. We can see how things change when we look at the top 1% of publications. Basically, we see the trend becoming clearer. Now, information can also be filtered by publication type, which includes, of course, books, book chapters, conferences and journals, and so on. And it can be shown in per capita terms for better comparability, which, as you can see, provides very interesting results, like Switzerland, Singapore, and Great Britain moving up the ranks here. Now we try to provide different ways to visualize the data to make it as useful as possible, including this moving bar chart, as well as this line chart featuring country time series. And of course, you can, for all these visualizations, you can select to remove countries at will. Now, I'd just like to note that the same information that we provide for countries is available at the institutional level, as you can see highlighted on the screen. For instance, here you see the top 10 institutions worldwide when it comes to research in AI. You see that basically they're American, with the exception of the Chinese Academy of Sciences and the Max Planck Institute in Germany. And here there is a snapshot for Brazil. You can filter by country, and this is just to illustrate the results at a country level. I hope that the ranking makes sense, but of course you're the experts here. We also provide collaboration networks between countries and institutions, which would of course be relevant to the principle on international cooperation, as well as the publication type distributions. Here, just a couple of examples from Stanford and Microsoft, only to illustrate the different profiles for different entities. As you can see, if you look at a university such as Stanford, almost 2/3 of the AI publications go to journals or conferences, whereas the profile for a company like Microsoft is based on patents and conferences, and not so much about journals. Now the third data point, again, we're under the third pillar, the third data point in the third pillar, just to keep track. It's all about jobs and skills, AI jobs and skills, and this comes from LinkedIn Economic Graph. Now, it shows AI skills penetration per country. As you may remember, this is directly relevant to Principle 2.4, which deals with building human capacity for AI. Here, we're using LinkedIn members' self-reported AI skills to calculate the skill penetration at the country level. We also provide data on international migration of AI skills in time, with yearly averages from 2015 to 2019. Now, it is important to note that to make this data comparable, migration flows are normalized using LinkedIn membership for the country of interest. And to wrap up Pillar 3 of OECD.ai, if you're curious about the way the visualizations are constructed and the data that is used, we provide methodological information under each of the charts, which we try to update as new developments come out. Now on to Pillar 4 of OECD.ai. Pillar 4 tries to monitor the policy situation by country. For this, we've constructed a database that contains over 300 AI policies and initiatives from around 60 countries. We can filter data and initiatives by type of policy instruments, and this basically refers to labor mobility, financial support, fellowships, etc. We can also see it by the type of group that the initiative targets, for example, students or SMEs or universities. And also, of course, by the country. So here's, if you click on a country from the map or on the flag, you would open that country's dashboard, where you'll be able to see the country's AI initiatives by topic. Here, we use Germany as an example. So you can see the initiatives by topic, budget range, responsible ministry, and so on. This information, as you may expect, is designed to help monitor the 5 policy recommendations contained in the principles. And again, it is updated about twice a year. Okay, what you see on screen now is a list of data visualizations. Some of them we're building as we speak and will be coming soon on OECD.ai, and some of them are more of a wish list that we'd like to do if we can in the future. There we include things like trending AI topics by country, for instance, using Google Trends, venture capital investments, financial statements, so mentions of AI in financial statements by country, sector, etc. Using GitHub to look at AI software development, looking at hardware and compute data from companies like Intel, NVIDIA, and information on AI jobs, job adverts, and master's degree. Now that's it for OECD.ai. Just very quickly, I would just like to mention the second implementation initiative that we're conducting, the OECD Network of Experts on AI, or 1AI in short. So what is 1AI? 1AI is a network of around 150 experts, including business, academics, and more than 30 people from government. Now, it is organized around 3 working groups. Working group 1 focuses on the classification of AI systems to try to identify policy considerations associated with different types of AI. The second working group looks at tools and use cases that could help implement trustworthy AI, such as technical standards, guidance, codes of conduct, etc. And working group 3 looks at national AI policies. And the goal here is to identify and share good practices from governments. Now, as I know that an image is worth more than 1,000 words, I wanted to show you to map all this in a single slide that you can see on screen. Working group 1 is really a wide effort that is relevant to all principles and will inform the work of the other 2 working groups, while the other 2 working groups focus on the implementation of principles 1 to 5 or 6 to 10, respectively. Now, conscious of the time, I will not go into detail for each of these groups. Just mention that the preliminary classification of AI systems from working group 1 focuses on 4 dimensions, namely the context of the sector where the AI is implemented, the output or the task of the system, so whether it is recognition or personalization or event detection, the input and the data type, so basically if it's text, images, frequency of delivery, etc., and the technology behind the AI system, which includes things like whether it is based on neural networks, decision trees, or an expert system. Now, just an allegory for working group 1 and why it is relevant. I'm sure you all know Charles de Gaulle, who was a very well-known French president after World War II. He famously asked the question, how can we oversee a country that has over 258 types of cheese? Now, like cheese, there are many different types of AI systems, and they all raise different policy issues. So the classification effort goes precisely in this direction. Now, again, this is still work in progress, but this is how the 4 dimensions of the classification will be displayed graphically. This is embedded into the OECD understanding of an AI system as defined in the principles. So basically what you see is we have the context, the sector of the system, then also the input, which is the second dimension that goes into the model, the technology, and which becomes a task or an output, which acts again on the context, becoming a cycle, right? So working group 2, here we created a survey to identify different approaches, mostly non-governmental, to human rights, fairness, transparency, explainability, and the other values. This too is work in progress, but the goal is to identify good practices to implement the principles. So basically, what it tries to do is it tries to identify who's doing what, what's working, what's not working, and where are the gaps. The survey was made available online at oecd.ai/survey, and we were able to gather 70 submissions from all the different stakeholder types. As you would expect, most submissions came from the private sector, as they seem more advanced in the development and adoption of AI systems. But here you can start seeing already some of the gaps, right? Like we see less experience with implementation of AI systems in civil society and trade unions, for instance. The submissions were equally classified by relevance to each of the AI principles. Notably here, there's a lot going on fairness, transparency, and explainability, which makes sense if you look at all the discussions that are taking place now around these topics. And now we're moving forward with the analysis of all these submissions as we speak. We group similar tools together to facilitate the work. For instance, we put together codes of conduct, risk management frameworks, corporate frameworks into one group. In another group, we have more technical stuff such as software tools and technical research. And under a third category, we have tools that help build capacity or awareness. Now our experts are hard at work here, and hopefully we'll be able to have a preliminary framework of tools and use cases in a month or so. Finally, Working Group 3 of One AI is developing practical guidance for policymakers in this case, and this is based on lessons learned to date. The work of this group is supported by country-specific examples and of course uses the national database of AI policies that I mentioned earlier. The approach here is on national policies and it focuses on horizontal issues to address, for instance, policy design, which means the processes to formulate national AI strategies and policies, but also to support policy implementation of the 5 policy recommendations, to provide policy intelligence, to monitor national AI policy implementation, and to identify approaches for international cooperation on AI policy. For instance, good practices by other IGOs, such as the European Commission, the IDB, UNESCO, or the World Bank. Now, I promised I would mention our coronavirus-related resources on OECD.ai, and I'm happy to take a few minutes for this. First of all, back in March, when the whole thing started, we wrote a policy brief called Using AI to Help Combat COVID-19, where we developed a crisis management framework to basically classify AI applications in this area. Now, the framework classified AI systems by stage in the crisis management process in which they were applied, be it detection, such as early warning systems or detection systems, prevention, which includes prediction of contagion, surveillance, personalized content, to provide or fight misinformation, the famous infodemics, the response stage, and here we include delivery systems or service automation like chatbots, and of course recovery, which includes systems that monitor economic recovery. Finally, there's the use of AI to accelerate research, which is cross-cutting along the whole process. Now, this was of course done in the early days, so I'm sure it could use an update or two now. But for those of you who may be interested, the publication is made available in 4 languages, including Portuguese and Spanish. Now it's only a couple of pages, so it could almost be used as a bedtime story. In terms of data, we have 2 streams of work. One, we have the AI-powered COVID-19 tracker. And number 2, we have live data on coronavirus-related publications from Microsoft Academic. So first things first, the tracker allows you to follow COVID-19 news and events as they happen and can be filtered by country as well, in this case, Brazil, just to illustrate. One can track the evolution of the pandemic by country as well. Here I'm doing it just for Mexico as an example. Once a country is selected, you can see the trace it leaves behind. The y-axis here is the growth rate of contagion, and the x-axis is the number of cases. Of course, you can do it for any and all countries, and you can choose whether or not to show or hide the trace as well. And you can do it not only for cases, but also for deaths and cases and deaths per capita. Now we have also the progression of the pandemic in each country in time. Here we show the top 10 countries in terms of contagion. I think it's interesting to note here what seems to be an indication of a second wave of contagion in Europe. You see here the first wave, then the curve flattens out, and then it starts growing almost exponentially again. So the x-axis here is the date, and the y-axis is the cumulative number of cases. We can explore the trajectory that each country has taken in terms of days after it reached 100 cases, which makes it a little bit more comparable in a way. So here we try to compare countries based on a similar starting date. So when they reach 100 cases, this is the x-axis, the number of days that have passed since the country reached 100 cases, and the y-axis is the cumulative number of cases. Now, the second stream of work in terms of COVID data is coronavirus-related research. And here we use the same infrastructure and methodology as we did for AI publications. So we use data from Microsoft Academic Graph, except that now we're tracking coronavirus-related publications and, of course, not artificial intelligence. And here, just to note that coronavirus is the larger category of respiratory diseases, of which COVID-19 is a subset. And that is why you saw some movement in early years, but also an explosion in the past few months. We provide time series as well by country. Again, the exponential growth of coronavirus research is evident here. Here on screen, you can see collaboration within and between countries, namely for Brazil as an example. And the same is possible to explore collaboration within and between institutions. So these are the top 10 institutions doing COVID-19 research in the world. You see, for instance, Wuhan University there and Harvard as well. Okay, we can also compare publications by type of coronavirus, be it SARS, MERS, or COVID-19. And as you would expect, research for SARS and MERS is nowhere near to what happened after COVID-19 hit this year. Of course, we're all hoping that this unprecedented attention from the research community will reveal itself very fruitful soon with the development and release of a vaccine. And I know I'm getting close to time here, but just as a bonus and to wrap things up, I just wanted to mention that we recently launched the AI Wonk, which is a blog space for OECD and other AI experts to share their work in a short and digestible way, and also provide links to their research. This has been, I think, a key step in allowing for dialogue and for the AI community to really come together and share experiences under a common user-friendly platform. Now, we did this because we believe that monitoring needs to go hand in hand with creating community and facilitating dialogue as well as the exchange of ideas. So if any of you has anything interesting to share, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy, of course, to accommodate. This concludes my presentation. For reference, I have included some links which could be of interest to some of you. I would like to end by saying that it has for me been a great honor to share this virtual space with all of you. And I wish you all a great rest of the conference, and I'm very, very much looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luis, for your presentation. Very lively and informative presentation, and also for your excellent time management. Let me announce that we have more than 200 participants with us live, which certainly shows a great level of interest on AI statistics for policymaking, which is good news. We have received a few questions from the floor. So maybe I will ask a few, and then we can open to a different round of questions. So our first question is from Paulo, and he asks, regarding the A-Jobs skill tab of the OECD.ai initiative, he would like to ask you, Luis, to comment about the taxonomy and the OECD efforts to accommodate differences among countries in relation to the labor market categories. So if you could address this question, I will then ask you further questions.
Okay, well, sounds very good. Thank you for the question. Now, the data that we use there it comes directly from LinkedIn. They're doing all the calculations behind the metrics, of course, because we cannot get a hold of data from LinkedIn members. This is a lot of it is private data. So the question was, what is the taxonomy? The taxonomy that they use, they take the skills that are self-declared by the users, by the LinkedIn members, and they classify those skills under different categories. They try to bundle them together when the bundling makes sense. For instance, under an engineering, under biology, under the different categories, and they do the same thing for AI skills. Now we have in the methodological note, we have provided some of this information. I'll encourage you to go and have a look. Some of the skills that are considered AI skills are, for instance, machine learning, then natural language processing, things like Python or PyTorch, etc. So that's what LinkedIn is using to find the AI skills in their members. They make this comparable, of course, by comparing only similar occupations in different countries. So if you're looking at I don't mean to get into a lot of details here, but just to say that things are very comparable among countries, and the data is standardized by the number of LinkedIn members in a given country.
Thank you, Luis. I will now ask you a question that is linked to this previous question. Fabio wants to know if you think that the innovative use of new sources of information to track AI deployment, such as the measures using LinkedIn that you mentioned or Microsoft tools, are these well suited to be used by governments as public statistics? Are they reliable and open to peer review by the scientific community? And in this regard, I think I would add an additional question. What are the methodological challenges that you may have to deal with in terms of quality management of this sort of data?
Okay, I don't think I got the second question, so let me start with the first one. That's a very good question, you know, because now I think the data that we're trying to present in OECD.ai is, as I said, as frequently updated as possible, because we think that since AI is moving so rapidly, we need to give an indication on where things are going, at least. And what I mean by indication is at least a directional indication, or how things are, or how countries fare related to one another. I do think there is room for improvement in terms of data validation from all these sources, which of course is being done by a lot of researchers. I don't know if you're familiar with Microsoft Academic, but it's been validated against things like Scopus, and the validation exercise was very encouraging, to say the least. So I think at the same, in parallel as these efforts are taking place to validate high frequency data, I think it's useful as well to use this data to provide an indication for governments to start moving forward regarding AI progress, you know, because we say that policy usually moves a lot slower than technology. I think with AI, this gap is even bigger. And to the extent that we're able to provide data that's up to date, I think this gap can be decreased at least by a little bit. So that's our goal. Of course, the OECD is taking a lot of, it's doing a lot to do measurement on AI. Here in our directorate, the Science, Technology and Innovation Directorate, we have several publications on AI measurement that you can find on OECD.ai as well. But, you know, as I said, the efforts have to come in parallel. So, Tatiana, I don't know if you would like to repeat the second part of this question.
Luis, I think you addressed my question nicely, because I was actually asking how you manage the quality of this data that is used as input. So you already addressed. Thank you very much. We have more questions for you, and I'm very happy that we now have women joining this conversation and submitting questions as well. So we have a question on gender disaggregated data. Is there gender disaggregated data analytics on the OECD platform? in terms of women, AI researchers, authors, gender-related subjects, gender-related AI systems, etc.? This is a question submitted by UNESCO, Zheng Hong from UNESCO in Paris.
Yeah, thanks for the question. This is a huge area of research, not only for us, but for a lot of our partners. I think a lot of people are trying to go in this direction. For instance, for AI research, we're starting to work on this. We would like to have, of course, AI research by gender. This is not an easy task because gender is usually, again, private data. So what's usually done is that AI models are run and they take first names from authors and they try to classify them to provide an estimate for males and females in the database. Of course, this is only going to be an estimate to the degree that we will be using a model to determine it. And important to say that these models work very well for Western names, but not so well for Asian names. So this is one of the roadblocks that we're experiencing, and hopefully we'll have something available soon. We're working on it now. I just don't know how much longer it would take, but this is a great area of research, I think, that we should pursue.
Thank you, Luis, and thank you also for this very important question. Winston wants to know, in your experience, what are the benefits of having a multi-stakeholder group design principles and propose best practices? And what are the shortcomings?
All right, the benefits, I think there are a lot of benefits. You know, the principles were reached by consensus, which is not something that it's easy to achieve. Getting all these experts and sitting them around one table, it was just a very rich experience because you could see all the perspectives on AI systems. So we made sure that most, if not all, perspectives were included. And this only ensures that the result is a lot more robust in a way. So if we wouldn't have all those experts sitting around the table, I don't think the countries would have come to a consensus agreement and then gone to the G20 to look for for a larger agreement with the G20. So I think that the role of the multi-stakeholder group was very important here. The shortcomings, of course, when you try to gather everyone's opinions, it might take longer. And it was an interesting process. We try to speed it up as much as possible. As you saw, 4 meetings in 5 months. These were people from all over the world coming together in one place. We try to speed it up, but it did take around, I think, 8 or 9 months to come up with the final recommendation. So I think robustness is the biggest benefit. And the time it takes is one of the, I wouldn't say shortcomings, but one of the challenges.
Thank you, Luis. Leonardo wants to know if you could outline some good practices that governments can adopt to implement public policies that foster the development of AI, considering that each country is inserted in a different institutional and economic context.
So these are all very good questions, and I'm happy because that means people were paying attention to the presentation. So good practices. I think most of our work right now is trying to identify those good practices, not only in governments but also in the private sector and in other organizations. You know, when it comes to governments, we have that database of national AI policies from more than 60 countries, and we're using that in the work of One AI, the group of experts that we have now. We're using that for one of the working groups to look at all those policies and initiatives and try to see if there are some policies that could be considered good practices and in which context. As you mentioned in your question, context is very important. Some policies, some databases for autonomous vehicles might be okay for Europe, but not so good in Australia because they don't account for kangaroos jumping on the road. So the context is very, very important, and this is one of the challenges of the group, to identify those practices, see if they're scalable, see if they can be adapted to different contexts, and this is ongoing work. We're hoping to have a framework for national policies and good practices in national AI policies. We're hoping to have it in the spring of 2021. So all I can say is that we're working on that. I'm not in a position to give you good, better or worse practices right now.
Thank you, Luis. So yes, indeed, we have been receiving many interesting questions, and people are indeed paying close attention to the presentation. This is our final question. Paulo would like to know, how is the OECD working with WHO and the ITU, considering the efforts concerning health and other AI protection policies, particularly in the theme of related to the COVID data that you presented earlier?
Yeah, we have had some calls with the WHO related to this data. So we're talking to them. In terms of working closer with them, I think it's the health division that is working a lot closer to them than us. They're actually identifying good practices in health related to the COVID crisis, and there is a policy brief related to health and COVID-19, or health policies and COVID-19 on OECD.org. I think you could find it there. They're working very closely with the WHO, and they do look at things like technology to fight the pandemic. So that's what I can say about the WHO. For the ITU, we're involved in some of their initiatives. We've been working in previous years. We've been working together a lot with them. But I think we can always improve the relationship. I think it would be very good to look into that.
Luis, thank you very much once again for your time and for your very interesting presentation with us today. Before we move on to the 5 minutes comfort break, I would just like to remind everyone that Cetic, we have been producing a lot of statistics on emerging technologies, and you can access our publications on our website. And I would also like to mention that we have recently published 2 different publications on the intersection of artificial intelligence and health, and artificial intelligence and the justice system. And there are 2 other publications that are coming up this year on artificial intelligence and education and the use by children. And finally, artificial intelligence and the future of work. So please stay tuned and check our websites for more updates on these publications. And I would like to announce a 5 minutes comfort break, and we will resume shortly with a session on AI measurement efforts by different organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana.
And we're back. So before we move on to our second round of presentations, we would like to share a brief poll to learn more about the profile of the participants that are with us online today. So you can see a question that says, which of the following describe your position in the statistical data production ecosystem? And we will allow 30 seconds for everyone to answer. So you can be a public data provider offering administrative data, a public data provider producing survey data and census data, a private data provider, or a data user. Or you can be all of the above. And a few more seconds before we end this poll. People are still voting. Final votes to go. And it seems that most of our participants are data users, but they are also public data providers, and they actually produce survey data and census data. And a few are private data providers as well as public data provider. Mind you that we can all be data users and data producers as well. So we will now begin the second round of presentations on AI measurement efforts. And we will have 3 invited speakers followed by a question and answer session. So please be encouraged to take note of your questions throughout the presentation and share them with us through the question and answer box. And to begin the session, I would like to give the floor to Pierre Montagnier, who is a statistician and an analyst in the field of the digital economy at the OECD. Pierre is one of the leads of the review on AI measurement in ICT usage surveys that is being conducted under the OECD's Working Party on Measurement and Analysis of the Digital Economy, the WP-MADE. So Pierre, thank you very much for being with us today, and you have the floor for 15 minutes.
Thank you, Tatiana. Thank you for the NIC colleagues for having me today and for the invitation. So I will talk about AI measurement in ICT usage survey, a review. This is a paper which is currently under revision, and it will be made publicly available probably before the end of the year. I will come to that in my concluding remarks. So my presentation will be split into the following points. So I will start to mention the policy rationale, official AI measures to inform AI policy. Then I will look at the AI definition, the cross-country comparison of AI surveys which raise issues and can be organized according to various levels of complexity. I will also look at initial results on AI use coming from official surveys, and then I will conclude and also look at the next steps. So policy rationale, as you probably all know, there is an increasing number of countries that launched AI strategies This highlights the needs of sound AI measurement to monitor implementation of those AI strategies. And we have here just picked up 3 examples highlighting the level of importance of those AI strategies at the national level, making Germany and Europe global leaders on the development and use of AI technologies and securing Germany's competitiveness in the future. That's for Germany. Singapore, by 2030, Singapore will be a leader in developing and deploying scalable, impactful AI solutions in key sectors of high value and relevance to our citizens and businesses. And for Sweden, makes Sweden a leader in harnessing the opportunities that the use of AI can offer, with the aim of strengthening Sweden's welfare and competitiveness. So cross-country analysis is really important when it comes to look in detail at the country position for AI use and development. And AI hold promises. They are still in front of us, those promises. But so far, AI does not seem to have had a notable impact on productivity growth in the US, for instance. And there are 4 possible explanations for that: false hopes, mismeasurement, redistribution, and implementation lags. This is to quote a research paper on AI. So official AI measures to inform AI policies. When it comes to this area, policymakers are interested to the question, to what extent are firms using AI in their businesses? This paper I'm presenting now is a contribution. It analyzes and proposes an analysis of the official AI use measures in a selected number of countries. And just bear in mind that this is a research area under constant development. As Luis previously mentioned, this is really a moving target. For example, AI measurement definitions in 7 countries and 2 international organizations cover similar topics, but in slightly different ways. And I will show you in a minute concretely. Still, AI survey questions are more heterogeneous than the definition itself and cover many areas. I will also show you how we analyze this according to the level of complexity. In the paper, we included an annex with detailed survey questions and wordings that could be useful if you are looking to answer questions to research surveys, or if you want to benchmark questions you already have. And finally, matching AI policy and official AI measures, we just want to highlight that AI policy objectives are much broader than the measures themselves. So looking at the AI definitions, obtain a clear-cut definition of AI is really challenging. You have the speed of AI development, which is really significant. The AI use pattern also change very rapidly, and AI-based systems are not at all directly measurable. So Luis presented also that there is a current ongoing work of the One AI Working Group of experts on classification of AI systems. So selecting a definition is complex, as AI is often not at all a standalone technology, but coexists with other embedded, other technologies which are embedded in AI. When it comes to complementary technologies, I can mention Internet of Things, big data analytics, and cloud computing. So we looked at the existing AI definitions used in the AI modules of the questionnaires, which are, those definitions are located in the introductory introductory part of the module, and we found that despite taking various forms, the definitions are not very different from each other, using words or expressions relatively close or similar, if not identical. So in the let me show you. OECD and Eurostat definition are not far from each other. They are organized around 2 dimensions with examples like pure software embedded in device, and the table you are having on the screen is just summarize the findings. So what distinguish most AI definitions are probably how the intelligence is captured and the associated type of action, the reference to a various level of autonomy or to the environment. So here are the main results with intelligence, which is referred to in the introductions, like making predictions, recommendations, predict, recommend, display intelligence, behavior, or think, or cognitive tasks traditionally performed by humans, etc. And by type of actions, we have problem solves, aiming at computerization of cognitive tasks, making machine intelligence, etc. And last but not least, looking at the AI definitions, most of those definitions are accompanied with examples illustrating those definitions, but not all examples. Sorry, not all the countries are adding examples. So this table is based on all the questions we found in the official survey questionnaires. And this table shows that the country coverage is relatively large for questions that relate to simple or intermediate level of sophistication. For AI use occurrence, you have a broad coverage, and for AI barriers and obstacles to AI adoptions, or for AI purpose of use. It's also relatively large, but to a lesser extent, for acquisition, how the AI was acquired, for AI type of technologies, the technologies which are, of course, at the heart of the engine, like machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing, etc. And for sectors, that is a field of activities. When AI use purpose refer to business functions, they can refer to business function or management fields, or broader economic goals like develop or increase knowledge about relations with customers, or develop new goods or services, or efficiency improvement, etc. It is worth to note that Denmark is the only country to ask about the type of data used for machine learning. In terms of data, it asks about numerical, text, image, or sounds. But if we go into a higher level of complexity on skills or on impacts, the number of countries or organizations which are including those kind of questions are, you have only few of them. So what are the results we have now currently available? So the results are based on the 5 countries, right? And what do they show, those results? So they show that AI is not anymore an emerging technology, especially among large firms. And the Korea examples also show that the AI uptake among large firms is changing very rapidly. We have 2 years differences here in Korea, and it's increasing quite significantly. But there are also significant differences between countries, and they raise comparisons issues. And those comparisons issues relate to 2 main dimensions. First, the methodologies. So methodologies, there are survey coverage in terms of size and industries. For example, we can say that for Japan, the large firms, they include only firms with 100 employees or more. And it's also worth to note that it's not so far from Canadian results, but Canadian results include firms, large firms with 250 more. So survey coverage, there are also the structure of the questionnaire. The structure of the questionnaire relates in terms to the order of questions, the heterogeneity of AI definitions, the different nature of questions. So that is also an issue in terms of comparison, and also in terms of unit measured establishment or enterprises. So that's for the methodologies. And the second main dimensions is also to be mentioned are more structural issues that we as frequently observe for other emerging technologies. Early birds in AI adoptions are primarily big firms or high-tech firms. And so the industrial structure of the country is not neutral in terms of comparison. And also AI is maybe a general purpose technology, but often as a part of firms' digital transformation journey, AI is combined with other technologies. I already mentioned it can be big data analysis, cloud computing, IoT, and those complementary technologies may contribute to explain differences between countries as well. So my conclusion is that there is a need for a clear AI measurement agenda that enables international comparisons, especially measures on AI diffusion in firms. This paper is a contribution to this need, but I would like to highlight that this is just a paper among many other initiatives, which was developed within the OECD Science, Technology and Innovation Directorate. And this is only a first step. This is also a first step towards a repository of statistical sound questions on AI use in firms. And we try to gather AI quality indicators to inform policy and also assist statistical agencies that develop AI use measures. I also wanted to say that this paper has been prepared in collaboration with the Oecd Ai Policy Observatory, and Luis provided a lot of information on its activities, which include in particular the current ongoing work on defining AI systems, and also initiatives on AI strategies. And finally, a revised version of the paper will be submitted in November to the OECD Committee on Digital Economy Policy for declassification, and it will be made publicly available. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Pierre. Thank you very much for sharing this important work that the OECD has been conducted. And we look forward to the publication of the paper that you mentioned. We have already been receiving questions and we will save them to the final round of question and answers. I should mention that if defining AI is a challenge, asking questions on AI is equally difficult. So at Cetic.br, we have used qualitative methods to explore this theme with respondents, and this is not an easy task at all. So to address this issue in greater detail, I will now invite the next speaker, Mark Urbach, who is Chief of the Digital Economy Metrics Program at Statistics Canada, to join us. Mark, Statistics Canada is an important reference worldwide in the production of sound public statistics. So please share with us how you have been measuring AI in your organization. You have the floor for 15 minutes.
Great. Thank you very much, Tatiana, and a pleasure to present here this morning. So I will share some of our attempts to measure artificial intelligence. Today, I'm going to focus just on our enterprise-based surveys and our efforts on that side. Obviously, as kind of artificial intelligence weaves its way into every aspect of our lives, there are some interesting questions to be asked sort of on the household and individual side of things as well. But we're probably not quite as developed on that side. And as Tatiana has mentioned, just getting at this issue with enterprises is probably challenging enough for us at this time. So we're trying to work our way through that, and I will share some of our attempts so far. All right, so I think both Luis and Pierre have sort of touched on the importance of measurement of this topic. I think this quote here sort of sums it up when we speak about how an artificial intelligence and the fourth industrial revolution will impact every aspect of people's lives. It sort of suggests to us as the National Statistical Organization that this is probably something that we should pay attention to and something that we need to have metrics on. So in Canada, as in many other countries, as Pierre outlined in his presentation, the introduction of AI and some of the impacts of it are really just starting to be understood and really starting to influence things in the way that enterprises conduct business and the impacts of that. So it's really, for us, the measurement side of things is really important to try and understand the capacity of our country to adopt, implement, and take advantage of this technology. So by having some basic monitoring in place, the idea is that this can support policy development in this area and really help Canada take advantage of this new phenomenon. So I'll talk a little bit about kind of measurement of AI at Statistics Canada. I think as Luis mentioned in his presentation there, I think he commented that monitoring this is hard, but we need to start somewhere. And really, where we started, we have the Survey of Innovation and Business Strategy. This is an innovation survey that's run across economy for enterprises. Initially, this was just, we included a simple yes/no question to enterprises on the 2017 edition of that survey. Really without a whole lot of explanation and kind of in a list of technologies as to whether firms used this or whether they felt that they did. So that was kind of the first kick at it. What we've done since then is we have developed a more extensive module for inclusion in the 2019 Survey of Digital Technology and Internet Use. So this is basically our equivalent of the ICT use by enterprises survey within Canada. A little bit of methodology on that survey. It's enterprise-based, so all of the operations within Canada are to be included in the company's response. It covers nearly all industries, so it really goes across the economy. And the only sort of caveat we put on that is we do screen out those small companies that have less than 5 employees. This is really done just as a response burden mechanism. Obviously, we have an ongoing relationship with all the businesses in Canada, and we're reliant on them to provide good quality data. So for those smaller businesses, we do recognize that these types of surveys can place a burden, and so for that reason, they were excluded. I should mention that the 2019 survey, it had a sample size of about 14,000 enterprises, so quite a good sized survey. In terms of the development of the module, in building that with our team, we used a definition. We really kind of tried to rely on some of the work that other countries and organizations had already done in this area. So the definition that we ended up using was really an adaptation of that had been developed by Eurostat and then also by INCE, the National Statistical Organization in France. We felt that this was quite clear as we could make it. In addition to sort of using those definitions, we also do a fair amount of qualitative testing of our questionnaires, going out and actually talking to businesses and seeing how they understand the definitions that are proposed and make sure that they're interpreting questions in the proper way. So that resulted in a little bit of tweaking as well, just to perhaps make things a little bit more clear. In terms of the module, we did end up kind of lumping all of the AI questions together within a module. We did this sort of throughout the questionnaire. This kind of fit the flow of the questionnaire better for us. This ended up sort of running counter to the Eurostat decision to include AI type questions in different portions of the questionnaire, at least in 2019. I think there may be some changes that will kind of be reflected. I think it's in the 2021 edition of that survey where the AI module will be kind of put more together in one area. So you can see the definition there. Artificial intelligence refers to systems that display intelligent behavior by analyzing their environment and taking action with some degree of autonomy to achieve specific goals. AI-based systems can be purely software-based or embedded in a device. So yeah, this is the definition that we've used. Overall, this survey went out into the field last winter. Overall, this seemed to be fairly well understood by respondents. We did not have a lot of follow-up in terms of questioning the definition. So I think that was quite successful, actually. So in terms of data collection, the module that we put together will really collect information on the proportion of enterprises that are using software or hardware with artificial intelligence. And then the proportion of enterprises using AI by the type of technology. Basically there, once they've selected that, yes, they used AI in some sort of capacity, they're presented with a list of types of technologies, which you can see there. And it's essentially a checkbox there. For those that have used AI, we've asked for reasons that they use AI. So this can sort of vary there. It's just, again, a list of checkbox type responses in terms of reasons that they've chosen to use it, whether it's to add efficiency to certain processes, to reduce to make better use of big data. There's a variety of response categories there. I'm happy to share this whole module. It's actually available on our website, so I can provide that link, and I believe it is at the end of the presentation here. And then finally, for those who selected that they did not use any AI, we wanted to get at sort of what are the reasons for this. I mean, in many cases, this might just be that they may not see an application for AI at this point within their business. But really, I think from a policymaker's perspective, this was important to understand. If it was a skills issue, if it was a cost issue, those are important things for us to monitor as well. So as we've talked about, it's really a challenge to simplify this potentially complex subject matter. Even with a self-response questionnaire, there's always going to be sort of as tight as we try to make that definition, I think there's always going to be a little bit of variance in the way that people understand it and the way people kind of respond to that question. So that's taken into account. But I think what this can provide is really sort of an early indicator of kind of the uptake of this technology, and then start to at least start the trend line now as we go forward. So the next steps for us, data from the Survey of Digital Technology and Internet Use. We had hoped to have it out by now, but we were a little bit delayed there just because of everything going on with the transition to working from home. So now the information will be released in November, and that will be available freely through our website. And really, I think as an organization and really within our section, we know this is a new subject matter. It's going to evolve as with any type of new emerging technology that comes onto our questionnaires. I don't think we're stuck in these questions that we've asked at this point. I think there is some capacity to sort of evolve those questions, perhaps to expand that module. Really from our side, it's really our responsibility to kind of incorporate the lessons that we've learned. And then as the technology itself evolves, we will have to adapt as well to account for changing uses of it and the prevalence within the economy. So just a couple of links to finish the presentation there. Within the Survey of Digital Technology and Internet Use link there, you can actually get a copy of the full questionnaire, which would have the questions as well. And then I'm also linking here to, we have a research group within Statistics Canada that has done some preliminary work in the area of AI. We can see here sort of looking at, based on job profiles, they've basically put together an analysis of who's potentially at risk within the Canadian economy, kind of what percentage of the population could potentially have their job replaced by sort of AI type applications. And they will actually have a series of AI related papers coming out later this fall that we can share going forward as well. So I will stop at that point and pass it back to Tatiana. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. This is indeed a new subject matter, and we highly value the experience sharing and lessons learned from the different organizations that have been attempting to produce measures on AI. So thank you very much. And we are still receiving questions from participants. So please do engage in this conversation with us. And let me also remind everyone that all presentations will be made available online after the session. So for our last invited talk of the day, I would now like to give the floor to Evyatar Kirchberg, who is a senior director at the Central Bureau of Statistics of Israel. Evyatar, I know that Israel is a hub for AI companies, so I can imagine that measuring AI is a priority for you. So please do let us know how CBS Israel has been approaching AI data. You have the floor for 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. Until I open my presentation, I want to thank you again for your you and the other organization for the kind invitation, the opportunity to present our work. Indeed, Israel is a very large hub for software mainly, but also artificial intelligence that is rapidly growing. And of course, we want to be able to provide our policy makers and the general public with information and indicators in order to be able to create policy and to examine it. So I'll be talking again about how we measure artificial intelligence in Israel. I will try to take you throughout our state of mind and processes that we did when we tried to develop our module. So let's start. Okay. So what's the story? I'll talk about how we defined AI, the concepts and the thoughts that we had along with the challenges that arrive with defining AI, which is a very broad concept. A little bit about how we developed our AI framework and what it includes. And eventually we'll go through the survey questions. Just for understanding, this module is embedded into our enterprise ICT usage survey, same as the one in Canada and Eurostat, the same, it's a very known module. So there's a lot of questions that are surrounding our AI module. Okay, we have more questions that are monitoring impacts and investments and things like that, that we can later on try to use them with the AI module. So defining AI, indeed, this is very, very tricky, okay? When we're getting to companies at the end of the day, they're saying that today's artificial intelligence is not so intelligent. So we want to be able to include all the things and all the activities done by companies that are included within an AI. So definition, of course, is very important. So what we've done, as Isaac Newton said, we try to stand on the shoulders of giants. So first of all, we reviewed all definitions, concepts, and uses available, not only in the sense of statistical offices and the uses of surveys, okay? Because those are a little bit differently designed. Of course, we used also national statistic offices like Canada, the US, South Korea, France, and of course the OECD. Pierre mentions some more countries, and we are now, will be interesting to see what they've done. So me too are joining Tatiana with the wishes for your work to be published. And at the end, we consulted with several AI leading companies and individuals in Israel. So what we've learned? We learned that AI is an emerging technology. It's not emerging in the sense of truly becoming as a new concept, because I think in 1955, when John McCarthy coined the phrase AI, there already been thoughts and of what AI is, and they've started to develop algorithms and things that will be met with the most important, I think, fuel of AI, which is data. Only today, the amount of data that is available for companies, each one of us is a digital unit, and we are creating a lot of information, and now artificial intelligence can thrive. So we need to be broad enough in order to capture all kinds of aspects and uses for AI. But at the same time, we wanted to be detailed enough, okay, in order to capture and to provide companies with the sense of what exactly we are using inside the AI. Those are my children. We are under quarantine together with half of the world. It is creating a very interesting situations for us, but until now it's fun. So what we've learned about AI mainly is defined by intelligence, okay? Artificial intelligence. So we're taking a well-known phrase, a well-known characteristic like intelligence, and we are combining with machines with it. And we are getting a quite good definition used by the OECD. We can see that the US Census used a similar definition. But this is a very broad definition. Okay, intelligence is maybe it's well defined, but what are we doing with it? How is it implemented? Is different things. So we took this definition to companies and we consulted with them, but all the time we get the sense and they ask for more functional definition. What exactly are we doing with AI? Because as I mentioned before, the intelligence of the AI today is somewhat questionable. If you use a chatbot or something like that in the recent time, you can see that it's have its limitation. So we took another part from Kaplan and Halen. Siri in my hand is a very interesting and funny article. And they're talking about that AI is a system's ability to interpret external data correctly, to learn from such data, and to use those learning to achieve specific goals and tasks through flexible adaptation. So eventually we try to provide ourselves with somewhat of a scheme of how artificial, what exactly is artificial. So we got a little bit artistics, and we got with this kind of module. So AI is starting, the algorithms are starting with data, they're moving, we are learning, we're taking the data, they're learning, they interpret it using tools like machine learning, which is a very, very broad concept of what AI is. Okay, machine learning can get almost every different algorithm inside of it. So the interpretation lead to some goals. Okay, we try to achieve goals. It could be classification, prediction, etc. And we have new applications like computer vision and natural language processing, which are the results of AI algorithms. Then we get some feedback. We take in the feedback. Maybe did we succeed? Maybe a follow-up is needed, and we interpret the data of the feedback, and then we are adapting our modules, reinforce it or recalibrate it in order to be more precise, and vice versa. So this is our module, and we try to put it on a definition which starts with the broad definition using intelligence as the key factor, but we also added more things that they are related to those characteristics used by artificial intelligence. So we have data, we have insights, we are achieving goals throughout adaptive process. So this is our definition. Now we went for the framework and the question of what we want to ask. We had a large session with policymakers and those AI companies and specialists in Israel. If there's something important that I can give you from our process, is that keep those three types of people together for a long time. It will create the necessary information that you wanna get. Okay, policymakers, statisticians, and companies or AI or AI specialists. This was very important for us. Okay, so our framework. We are talking about 3 dimensions. It's technology, the field of activity in the sense of the business activity in which AI is being used. Because companies can, for example, develop electronic devices and use AI in their advertisement or maintenance of the machines. So this is the field of activity. It allows you to divert from the traditional industrial classification and the purpose in which objectives the enterprise wish to achieve when using those AI technology. So this is another graphic way to present it. Okay, if we start with an example, we start with transportation. It's the field of activity. For the field of activity, we are using, we have a purpose. We want to automate our processes, equipment, and machinery. We are using AI technology, which could be machine learning, computer vision, etc. And we are getting a use or a product that's called an autonomous vehicle. So how did we get to those those purposes and field of activity? Because there's a lot of AI business applications, and we need to shortlist them in order to manage it inside of a survey. Okay, if there is a couple of problems when you have a too large list. One it could be confusing for the companies, but the second is that you can get a small amount of companies answering for a specific use, and then you cannot publish it or use it as a national indicator. So what we did, we categorize all uses that we are reviewed. Okay, a lot of uses that are today are developed or already used in companies, in articles, in everything that we can put our hands on. We categorize them to field of activities, purposes, and we listed them in a way that we can manage it inside of a survey. At the end, we decided not to ask about specific AI technology. Our understanding is that the ability of policymakers to really react to the notion that the company has made used machine learning, okay, is not that high. We need to create them more layers of information. So this is an example, a partial list of our major AI users that we reviewed. Okay, you can see autonomous vehicles, traffic flows, management, public transportation, etc. And we shortlisted into one field of activity. The same things we did to purposes. So what we have now, we have like a 2-dimensional graph that holds on one hand the fields of activity, on the other the purposes, and we can see the same example that we saw before. If we are looking on transportation and automation, then we get autonomous vehicles. But when we have the data, okay, users are not longer important, but we can see where are the places in which AI is best embedded into or implemented across the economy, okay, like manufacturing and automation. And we can think about how we can fill the gaps and how we can use the information better. So let's go quickly about the survey questions. Again, we start by asking if the company is using AI according to the definition. So if so, we are moving to the next question. Here you can find the short list of field activity, starting with banking, transportation, sales, etc. Now we are asking about purposes, which gives us more understanding of what the company wanted to do. And if it succeeds, it will be even more interesting. So I will not go through all, but this presentation will be available at the website or page of the workshop. We also ask about AI specialists. We understood that the main barrier or obstacle for AI today is shortage of AI specialists. So we ask, did you try to recruit AI specialists during 2019? And a little bit about what were the difficulties to filling those specialist vacancies. And at the end, we wanted to know one more dimension, which how did the AI application came to life? Okay, who developed it? So, is it enterprises or is it internally developed, the enterprise, or externally by suppliers that are using or adapting a specific algorithm to the company, or was it a prepackaged software? This is this is our model. Thank you very much for listening. And if you wish to have more questions, perhaps later, you have here the new our new Israel Digital Index team. You can contact them, and they probably will have some answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Evyatar, for sharing your experience with us. Very interesting indeed. And we have received a few questions from the floor, which I would like to open to be addressed by all three speakers. I will start with a question that was asked particularly for Mark, but that I would like to open to other speakers. Are you planning on adding demand-side AI questions on other survey questionnaires? And to this question, I would add another question. Are other data sources being used by your organization to produce measures on AI? For example, admin data, registries, or automated measures. I wonder if you consider that it would be feasible to collect this data through other mediums that are not only through business surveys. And in this regard, I will also add Daniela's question. She asks if you could cite examples of initiatives to measure the use of AI in other areas such as public health, education, and/or welfare policies.
Okay, I can start there. So really, I think for us, this is kind of our first crack at this in terms of AI measurement. There is not a whole lot else going on in the agency, at least that I'm aware of. We have obviously quite a large group of people working on this, so it could be that there are things going on that I'm unaware of, but I would expect that kind of going forward, we will see more and more work in this area. And I think as you flagged, probably business surveys are not really the only way to get at this information. I know we've seen some unique approaches from the OECD in terms of AI measurement through citations in scientific journals, or through kind of using web search and web crawlers to go through proceedings for certain events to try and get at a rate of incidence of AI and its contribution to scientific journals. So I think probably surveys are a good start for this, but probably will not be kind of the final answer for things as well.
Thank you. Evyatar, would you like to comment as well?
Yes, please. We are using also in our research and development survey, we are using the same definition of AI, and we're asking the companies to provide us information of how much R&D or how much money was invested in R&D in AI activity. Also, we have a startup registration, if we can call it. There's some It's data that is surrounding our business register that provide us information about the field of activity of all startups operating in Israel and their main products. Okay, so we have a lot of information about AI, the status of AI startups, if we can call it this way. So this is the main sources, but I agree with Mark, and we saw it in Louis' presentation that a lot of data is coming from other sources, maybe open in the web, LinkedIn, and other places that are providing some kind of the possibility to understand which kind of I don't know, activity is going on. That's it.
Thank you, Evyatar. Pierre, would you like to comment as well on this question?
Yes. Two observations. In fact, AI is both an emerging technology, while maybe not fully emerging, has already emerged, and it's also a general purpose technology. So this means that we will very quickly see in various fields, not only the ICT usage among businesses, but within other areas like education or public administrations. We will see very soon probably questions in the survey or in the in the survey in those areas related to AI use. This could be one angle. And the other angle could be that directly looking at how not through survey, but through usage data tracked through the IT systems directly, how those fields are using AI for governance purpose or for just, let's say, business function purpose or everyday functionality purpose. So I think it's going to be soon measured, and the results might appear also relatively soon. But let's say that with the caveat that it's really still at the beginning, at the infancy of the phenomenon.
Thank you very much, Pierre. And since you have the microphone, we are receiving a few questions on the methodological challenges and complexity in terms of the definition of AI, and a lot of concern around, for example, international comparability. So Marcelo wants to know if these questions are comparable, if they are being asked and measured since they are using different methodologies, if they can be compared, the data that is being produced by different countries, for example, Canada and Israel, and also if they approach different sectors of the economy. And Paulo also mentions that, as we have said today, this is an emerging and fast-paced changing technology. So is the AI classification changing? Does it consider specificities in different contexts like health, agriculture, and in different countries as it is measured? And how does this affect comparability, for example? Has the OECD been looking into this specific concern?
Okay, excellent questions. Not easy answer. Well, I will say that it takes time to fine-tune let's say the comparability surfaces, the comparability to maximize the comparability. We are just, as I said at the beginning, and in the paper I presented, this is really the initial attempt we try to look at. I say we because I forgot in my presentation to mention that I have a co-author in the paper, Irene Eck, and I want to thank Irene because it was a joint work, a common work, and so I think that it's changing and evolving very rapidly, but we are currently having an expert group working more in detail into 4 dimensions. I think it was mentioned by Luis in his presentation concerning the AI definitions, probably to fine tune and to have a better understanding of AI core technologies, AI purpose of use, what tasks they are aiming at, and by having those definitions provided by the expert group, it will probably help to fine-tune a better understanding at the international level. Now, so just to say that we are all working in this direction, and also this is quite let's say good and unique opportunity because we can work together to build a measurement tool that will allow to compare apples with apples and oranges with oranges as much as possible, because we are just at the beginning of the phenomenon. So we have this opportunity to do it, and we are investing in that direction at the international level, despite, of course, the fact that it's a complex area, but this is a unique and precious possibility that we are maximizing, in fact. So not a straightforward answer, but I think that there will be a better understanding and a better possibility in the near future to have indicators and understanding on the usage of the phenomenon, which is on the sound basis.
Thank you, Pierre. Indeed, this is a very precious opportunity, and I believe that these experience sharing forums are valuable for us to move forward with the lessons learned by the colleagues that have been approaching this emerging and very new and complex theme. So thank you for your optimism, and which I share with you in terms of moving forward. We have 2 final questions since we are running out of time, unfortunately. One question particularly asks, Paulo wants to know if in terms of the use of AI, it would be possible to distinguish between companies that use AI solutions and services that are mostly available from big techs, and those in which knowledge is actually being internalized, and when there is understanding of the construction of models. So this is a very complex evaluation, I suppose, to make through these surveys, but Paulo would like to know if this is the case. And finally, for all, I would like to ask, Winston wants to know, in your experience, how is this data that is being collected on AI being received by policymakers generally?
Okay, perhaps I'll start with a word or two about international comparability. International comparability is very important because you want to be able to do a gap analysis, but AI is a rapidly growing technology, and things are happened on the ground now. And statistics, it's the nature of statistics, it's moving forward together with the phenomena. Okay, it takes time to understand it, and then statistics can provide good insights. So for you policymakers, things are happening now, and you need to try to find policies and things that enable AI to grow in your countries. This is for international comparability. About understanding if companies are embedding technologies from other companies, if I'm phrasing it right, this is exactly one of the questions that we ask. We don't yet have sufficient data to understand if it's happening or not, but it will come. But it depends on who is responsible for developing the AI module, the AI technology in your company. It could be based on service or something like that, or the technologies that were custom made for your company, and it's bringing information from other companies inside to your company. This is, I think, policy in the question of policymakers, how they are reacting to this kind of data. So we don't have a lot of data today, only coming from other surveys, not the specific models that I presented, but policymakers take a large interest in AI, okay, and they need something to show them what the current situation is. Okay, so they are trusting a lot of types of information, and we need to provide good and solid information for them to do so.
Thank you. Pierre, would you also like to comment on these questions?
I think policymakers, it's probably a bit too early to look at feedback, because we have only a few data, so probably we have to wait a bit concerning the feedback of policymakers. But they are certainly, it's really a hot topic, and they are also certainly interested in seeing not only about the users, but about the investment in AI as a more from the supply point of view as well, for economic and strategic reasons. Concerning the ICT use, I think it's really at the early stage, and it will be interesting to see once we have the first results of the European countries late December of this year. We have, let's say, proxy indicators of AI use. This is not a module, but this is proxy indicators. And we will have, as Mark said, in November, the results for Canada. So then we can revisit the questions about policymakers' feedback, initial reactions, probably.
Thank you, Pierre. Mark, would you like to make any final comments on these questions before we close?
Just very briefly, because I know you're over time. So maybe just on the international comparability question, I think as both other speakers have mentioned, I mean, we're really in early days here. And I know at OECD, when we go around the WP Made table, there's all sorts of initiatives in the field right now. And I think we would be wise to kind of at least take those first results and see what has worked, what has not, before we kind of attack perhaps sort of a model module of AI use. Obviously, there's going to be different sort of policy needs from country to country, but I think that sort of international comparability angle will be important going forward, but we're not perhaps at a stage quite yet to build that module. And I think, just as the others have suggested as well, we have not had an opportunity to present this to policymakers yet, but the reason it was included on our questionnaire is certainly that it's there is some appetite for it, and I think they will be the data will be very well received. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for your views on that. Unfortunately, our time is up for today. I would like to thank everyone for your active participation and interest. A special thanks to our excellent panelists, Luis, Pierre, Mark, and Eviatar, for your time and generosity in speaking for us today. Thank you very much indeed. Tomorrow's session is not to be missed. At 10 a.m. GMT-3 time, we will begin our webinar on statistics for citizenship, covering issues such as data journalism, data literacy, data deserts, and more. So I hope you are able to join us again tomorrow. Thank you very much once again, and goodbye.